want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that have been going on. We got a little bit of a new setup here. We're going to start doing some videos and things. That way I can play videos and we can talk about those as they go on. So we're a little crammed in here. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on between the left and the right, or the liberals and conservatives right now in our nation. It's gotten obviously very hostile, both during the election process and then post-election. And so I've seen a lot of things going on, and I feel like I've got a little bit of a unique perspective on this thing, particularly due to the fact that I grew up in New York and, New England, starting in New York, and then, made my way down to Texas. I was also, I was very, what we would call liberal, up until I was about 26, and then the last couple of years of my life, I've grown to where, if you look at most charts, how they graph positions, on almost every position, I'm really quite moderate, maybe slightly right or slightly left leaning on a couple of things. The one thing that I'm pretty far right on is, as you've seen in my other videos, is the abortion issue. But other than that, I generally hit kind of in the moderate spot on those charts. The interesting thing, though, is based on where our culture at large has gone, I'm considered, probably by many people, I'd be considered like a right-wing extremist in many ways. And so I want to talk a little bit about how this division has occurred, and maybe why people were so surprised about the direction of the election, and some of the other things that are going on in our culture. So let me start with this. Let's think for a second about why we believe what we believe. Now, a lot of us want to think that, and I don't mean just you personally, I mean as a culture, as a nation, as a large demographic of people, how does the nation as a whole generally come to know what it thinks it knows? And I think there's some really influential, spheres of industry that are impacting our mindset. And so I know we'd like to think that we're all logical beings and we make these very calculated decisions based on reason and a strong ethical foundation, but that's just simply not the case. There's obviously individuals out there who do take the time to go through these processes themselves, but most of the time we believe what we believe because it's what we were taught to believe. And so there's some areas. So on a national level and a local level. Nationally, we've got news, arts, entertainment. So this would be like, obviously, your ABC, CNN, maybe Fox News. You've got, arts and entertainment. You've got movies, music, television shows, major, paint and things like that are out a little bit right now. But, you could even throw some of the different magazines and periodicals into one of those two categories on a national level. Government, obviously our national government, what our political leaders teach us and tell us. Business is huge, what we're taught through marketing, what we're taught through corporate positions on social issues, things like that. Then we've got the school system, which you've got the public school system, and then a smaller, maybe less influential private school system. Then on a local level, you've got your families, your friends, and your community leaders, be they, pastors or, if you're part of social clubs or sports teams or things like that, you've got your community leaders there. So let's just think about this, and let me do this. Let me tell you about this from my perspective growing up. So I grew up, as I mentioned, up in New England up until I was 15, and then we started to move. We moved into St. Louis for a couple of years, and then I went to college in Texas. And even when I was in Texas, I still remained very liberal for several years. So what happens is, and I think a lot of the people who would maybe classify themselves as liberal or would fall on the the left-leaning, as we tend to call it, scale, I think what maybe some of them don't realize, particularly those who are, as we see in some of the election graphs, particularly up in the northeast major cities, and then the West Coast and some of the major cities there, and then a couple of the major cities like Chicago and Miami as well. But what they don't get much of is conservative responses to things. And what they do tend to get of that is the more inflammatory caricatures of a conservative perspective. And so, well, here's what happened to me. I was, like I said, New England. So on a national level, what is the news and what is the media, arts and entertainment, videos, television, movies, music? What are the pop artists, the pop celebrities, the popular news outlets? What stance do they tend to take? Well, it's going to be this blue, this left, this liberal leaning perspective. Our government for the last 8 years has been more on the, particularly the major voices through the President Obama and his administration have been liberal, left-leaning, Democrat. Business, again, most of the businesses. Now on a smaller scale, you'll see a handful of conservative businesses that are making an impact on their local community, but when you look at the major companies that are having an influence, they generally tend to espouse liberal values. And you see this in certainly their social, the social issues that they back with their finances and with their, we saw, for example, and I don't want to open this can of worms, but just as it tends to be a left-leaning stance, like the transgender bills that went through, when you had a state, which would be on a more local level, that tried to make a stance against Target, who had, this is a business who had taken a social issue stance, and it was a left-leaning one. The state came back with a right-leaning one, and I tend to fall, more in this range, is what I said. But what you had was this backlash from businesses, and even from other governments, I think New York and some other areas, where these businesses threatened to cut off all business to those states. So you're seeing there's this tremendous influence of business that pushes this as well. If you look at marketing, if you look at advertising, it's a much more sexualized, media environment through business than a conservative stance might take. And so this is what you see. Now, and then we've got schools. Okay, schools. Well, the public school system is obviously, it's become very secular, and I would suggest that that's not really what it should be. It should be pluralistic. If we're going to do a public school system, we're not a secular nation, we're a pluralistic nation. That's a whole other can of worms we need to open later. But then on a local level, the schools and that, now we're going to the local level with family, friends, community, and leaders. Now, when I was in New England, I didn't have many family, friends, or community leaders that were over in this. So if you're thinking about it, growing up, what I'm getting is on a national level, my news, my arts and entertainment, my government, my business, my public schools that I attended, those were all left-leaning. Then family, friends, community leaders as well, those were all, because of my, the geographic region I was in, those were all left-leaning. So I never heard this except in caricatures. I never heard a conservative stance from a rational perspective. It was all just jokes. It was making fun of people who would have a conservative stance. This is honestly, they're the rednecks, the toothless, mullet-wearing, truck driving, Confederate flag waving. This is the caricature of a conservative perspective that gets espoused in very much of our nation. And so I think what's happening right now is that people who are they're in kind of a liberal bubble. Now let's look at the other side. The people who grow up with I've got this red here. On a local level, they grow up with a conservative family, friends, and community leaders. The difference here is that while they may have a conservative family, friends, and community leaders, and even if some of their schools, let's say even you get someone in a conservative private school, even these people, their news, the media that they're seeing, the government, the business, for the last 8 years especially with the government, have all been portrayed from a liberal perspective. And so what happens is these people over here are getting, from these things, they're getting a blue perspective, and then from these things, they're getting a red perspective, so they're at least being exposed to these, whereas these guys over here are being exposed on a national level to a liberal perspective and on a local level to a liberal perspective. So then when they see these random, rare characterizations of a conservative perspective, it gives them a false understanding of this. And so I think what's happened is really the left is living in more of a sociological, psychological, geographical, cultural bubble that's keeping them from hearing rational things over here. And so if I even come into a conversation and I say, well, yeah, I've actually come to the conclusion that, and this is, like I said, the most far right-leaning stance I have on an issue. If I come to a situation and I say, well, through my logical, seeking, through looking at science, through looking at philosophy, through looking at an ethical framework, I've come to the conclusion that abortion is wrong, or that it should be legislated against even, what someone over here is going to say is that they laugh at me. I get attacked, I get called names, I get told you're a man, you're not allowed to have an opinion on that, all of these things. And so what happens is there's this incredible bubble that's allowed the left, particularly, especially in a liberal local area, to force through that perspective in their own mind. And so anything that comes contrary to that, they've gotten what's called an ad populum argument against it, which is, it's an argument from popular opinion. And so that doesn't mean it's necessarily incorrect, but it does mean that they can just rely on the fact that it's popular and not necessarily go to the lengths to understand the rational discourse that would arrive at the conclusions. And so it creates this kind of division here. And so now what we're seeing on the right is very interesting. I can tell you from someone who used to be liberal and used to have a very low perspective of these people and these ideologies, even when I was around them for, it was about 6-7 years before anything changed on that. And so I can tell you, as someone who's now, I get kind of boxed into this perspective, but really I'm probably here on most issues. You don't get treated nicely for holding these views, and no one really wants to listen to you, even if you try and have a very reasonable conversation. There's a lot of name calling that comes in, and so what's happened now is we've gone through so much of this. You constantly have the media, berating you if you've got a conservative opinion. Social media has just given voice to extremists of all kinds, whether they're left or right. And so what we're seeing now, I think, and I don't necessarily advocate for this, is another, like a pendulum swing. I wish I could even say that. It's really more of a stretching that's occurring where, we've moved really far left on a lot of issues, and now there's a portion of the population, larger than people realized, that are moving very far right in response to this very far left view. And so let me give you an example of this. Yesterday, one of the top trends on Twitter was, hashtag fight for 15. Now, let me get this here. I would consider that I have a moderate view on this. A very far right view, as we might call it, in this kind of a context, a very conservative view on this, let's say this is more capitalistic and this is more socialistic in this case, on this movement here. This person over here is going to say something like, no, it's fight for yourself, survival of the fittest, capitalism will weed you out, you just need to work for it, that sort of a thing. These guys are saying, no, we need a mandatory $15 minimum wage. And what I'm saying here in the middle is kind of like, well, no, I think we do need to help people out. There is a use for a social welfare system to an extent. But it needs to be one that empowers people out of that welfare system. And I also look at the economics of things, and I look at, there's different business models. Some businesses could certainly afford to pay almost all, if not all, of their employees $15 an hour. Because they've got a high profit margin and some other factors working in favor of that sort of a model. However, there's other businesses that have worked to create very low margins and have to do a very large number of transactions to make that worth their while. And so forcing companies to go to a $15 minimum wage may not be the most advantageous solution to help the people that are in poverty get out of poverty, because what will happen is certain companies may end up having to close doors and then nobody's got jobs. So what I'm saying here is like there's some kind of a middle ground, and the purpose of this video isn't talking about the economics of Fight for 15 and what we need to do with our poverty that we're dealing with. But I'm just giving an example of where I might be a more moderate position, but because the left has become so extreme, I am now viewed just for saying that I don't think Fight for 15 is maybe the best approach to this. I'm now considered like a right-wing extremist or a right-wing nut, whatever you want to call it. And so I think what we need to start to look at here is the fact that these extreme positions that silence discourse, and if you don't agree with exactly what we say, then you're an evil person. You know, I commented on it, on that particular issue. I just said, I don't think this is the best policy economically to alleviate the ailments of our culture and the people who are in poverty. And I got called all kinds of names. I got attacked as, oh, you're not a Christian. Jesus wouldn't have said that. I can't believe you would, you're over here selling theology and, all these different, I got attacked over and over and over again. It's so funny because the left talks about tolerance so much, but then here I have all these people with the left opinion and they don't even want to have a logical conversation with me. They just want to attack my religion. It's crazy. And so, or, tell me to check my white privilege. And it's like, it's really wild what's going on. And so we've gotten very far this way, and I find myself even, and I have to check myself on this because I've become, I'm sitting here, let's say on an opinion like that, I'd say on the economics of like a Fight for 15 thing, I'm maybe like right here on this issue, and so if I'm here, or even really I might even be here, but I'm even kind of accepting some of what I've been told about myself by particularly people who are left-leaning, what happens then is I find myself, okay, you're going to call me names, you're going to reject what I'm saying, and so you're automatically categorizing me over here, like all the way over here, just because I don't agree with that particular solution, even though I agree that there's a problem there and we need to come up with a solution. And so what happens is these guys who are here start getting bucketed over here, and you start getting pulled really far the other direction socially in kind of a group thing, and I'm telling you, you got to fight very hard not to. I'm fighting to stay moderate because I find even if my policies aren't changing, my perspectives of poverty aren't changing, the economics aren't changing. But what's happening is socially, I'm getting categorized over here, and so I'm starting to identify more and more with this extreme position, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep my policies here in the middle in a healthy place, but because of the attacks so now what's happened is a lot of people have allowed themselves though to get categorized over here, and they've responded. And I personally, I'm opening a whole other bag of worms here, but I think Trump tends to be, he's a little bit of a blunt instrument at times. He's a wrecking ball of sorts, and I think a lot of people over here, and even some people who had previously been over here, as we found from the election results, are saying, I'm sick of getting categorized over here, but I'm getting pulled over here anyway, so I'm just, let's break this thing down, and people are getting pulled over here, so now you've got this extreme left that's become really kind of the norm, and unfortunately, the reasonable conservatives have been pulled over here, and so we've got this extreme polarization that's occurring in our nation, and it's very, very harmful. So let me give you a couple of, this is a big problem. So what can we do to solve this? Well, because we got to be solution-oriented on this thing. Well, for starters, if you find yourself name-calling, it's just not effective. I mean, it's very effective in making people feel bad and maybe making yourself feel good for a short period of time, but it's not effective in a solution-oriented perspective. It's not effective in trying to actually come up with policies that are going to help better our nation. We do, whether you agree with Make America Great Again, I think most of us want to make America great. And so we need to make sure that we're having conversations that are going to help us get there. So if you're name-calling, if you catch yourself doing that, try and pull back. I find myself, I've done it before too. I'm not perfect at this. And so we just need to, pump the brakes on that sort of thing, try and keep ourselves accountable, keep our friends accountable. On the other side, we also need to make sure that we're listening to people. That's a huge issue is every time that something comes up, try and read an article from someone who's over here, and try and find, this is the big thing, is really try and find voices that are going to help you understand what's going on in the middle, who are going to try and look at both perspectives and do that. And so listen to those things, and then have a healthy dialogue. Find some people, and maybe don't use social media so much for this sort of thing, because unless you're really, really grounded, what you're going to end up doing is the loudest. It's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and so what happens is the loudest voices tend to get the attention. Now, I made some comments on the Fight for 15. I got a lot of positive feedback, although it was primarily from conservatives, unfortunately. But the voices that I heard the loudest were the ones that were attacking. And so social media may not be the best place to have these dialogues, but find some people that you know and trust locally, that you can have conversations with. And then we need to start trying to create some products. That's really why we do what we do, and why I do what I do, is because I want to help us have reasonable dialogue here, to help make sure these guys understand what's going on here, these guys understand, and we're not going to agree on everything, but I think we can agree on more than we do, and I think we can be a lot more civil, and I think we can be a whole lot more rational in our process of coming to conclusions. So I'll leave you with that. I went on for quite a while here. I hope this blesses you. I hope you can glean something from this, and I hope it can start. I hate saying stuff like this for the sake of coming across as self-promoting, but share this video with people. We really do need to understand these aspects in our culture. So share it, comment on it. Let's try and work together to understand one another. And so even if we don't come to terms, maybe we can at least treat each other like human beings again. So thanks, God bless, and I'll see you guys.